So I'm out here shooting in my backyard because it's nice outside and it's kind of the only outdoor time we get nowadays. So I thought it'd be fun to shake things up, get out of the kitchen, especially since I'm not doing a recipe or showing you how to cook anything. Today I'm going to be doing the video on baking ingredient substitutions. If you follow me on Instagram, you know I sent out a poll asking what ingredients you're having a hard time finding and which ones you want substitutions for. I want to give a shout out to my friend Rachel, who actually inspired this video. She was baking a cake at home and didn't have cake flour. So she asked me if I had a recipe for cake that didn't have cake flour, and while I could have found one, instead I decided to give her a trick for making her own cake flour. So we're going to start with that one today and then run down the list of responses that I got in the Instagram poll that I sent out. If there's any that you think I left out, leave it in the comments below. If I get enough, I'll make another video. If not, I can always just write them out either on Instagram or something like that. Let me know what you guys want. So the first one I'm going to start with is the cake flour because that's what started this. So the point of cake flour is to make your cakes and other baked goods tender. If you don't have cake flour and you don't feel like making your own, of course, all-purpose flour is going to be fine. You just might get a little bit of a different texture with your cake. But making your own cake flour is super easy. You will need all-purpose flour. So for every cup of cake flour that your recipe calls for, you will need to measure out 1 cup of all-purpose flour. And then you're going to remove 2 tablespoons from that and replace that with 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Sift it all together so that it can all get together, and then measure out what you need for the cake recipe. Super simple. You probably have cornstarch in your pantry already. If not, I do think it's an easier thing to find, whereas the different types of flour are not. So that's always a good substitute, a good backup to have. Moving on, the next one that I got a lot was butter, which is a little trickier just because of what butter adds to recipes. Some recipes call for different consistencies of butter. Some will want melted, some will want room temperature, some will want ice cold butter for things like pastries, biscuits. But there are some viable options that you can substitute out. So the first one is full fat Greek yogurt. It's really important to get full fat just for the consistency. You want something as close to butter as possible and something that will act as close to butter when reacting with all of your other baking ingredients as butter. So full fat Greek yogurt is a good one. All of these that I'm going to give you is a 1-to-1 ratio. So if your recipe calls for half a cup of butter, use a half a cup of whatever the replacement that you choose to go with is. So the next one, and I honestly wasn't even going to recommend this one because I've used it before. It's avocado. I made avocado brownies once, and they were probably the single most disgusting thing I've ever eaten in my entire life. Everything from the smell before I ate them to the mouthfeel, the taste, they were just gross. But some people really like it as an alternative, and it does work. So I will suggest it to you. You can do with it what you wish. I love avocados in almost every other situation. Baking for me, it just is not a winner. But it can be done, again, in a 1-to-1 ratio. And the next one on the vegetal side is bananas. Mash them up, measure them or weigh them like you would your butter. Something to keep in mind is bananas will add a different taste and they will add sweetness. So keep that in mind with your other ingredients. You can cut back on the sugar in the recipe based on the ripeness and where your bananas are at. So those are 2 really good options. If you're making something like a biscuit or a pie dough that's going to call for cutting in really cold and solid butter, coconut oil is going to be your best option because it takes on the same consistencies at similar temperatures to butter. So if you stick your favorite coconut oil in the fridge before weighing it out or measuring it out and getting it into your recipe, it should carry on the same characteristics as butter. Some coconut oils do taste more like coconut than others, but if you already have your favorite and you're fine with that flavor, go ahead and use it just like you would butter. If it needs to be melted, leave it out. If it needs to be room temperature, put it in your cabinet or something where it's not getting super warm, it's like in that in-between stage. But for biscuits or pie dough, anything that calls for cold butter, chilling it is going to be your best option. All right, so this next one is probably my favorite baking hack or trick, whatever you want to call it. So light cake flour adds tenderness to cakes and cookies, whatever. Buttermilk also serves the purpose of adding tenderness to things, of course, pancakes, waffles. But you'll find buttermilk a lot of times in some bread recipes and cake recipes. Making your own buttermilk is super easy and uses things that you probably already have or can get, most likely. So for every cup of buttermilk that your recipe calls for, you're going to measure out a cup of milk, regular milk, and add in 1 tablespoon of acid. That could be vinegar, lemon juice, apple cider vinegar, red wine vinegar, whatever. You just need that acidity because that's what makes your final product tender. I have done this with non-dairy milks, and it probably works fine. It won't react the same, but you will get that acidity from the vinegar, and you're just mixing it into your milk like a regular buttermilk would. So using non-dairy milk is fine. Whole milk, 2%, honestly, whatever you can find, adding that acid to it is going to give you the effect of buttermilk. So you're going to be good. All right, the next one is baking powder. So baking powder is very hard to find. For every teaspoon of baking powder that your recipe calls for, you're going to measure out a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and a 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar. And that's for every teaspoon. I know the math in your head doesn't add up, but if you sift it all together and measure it out, it should come to 1 teaspoon, and that'll be like your makeshift baking powder. This next one that I have is one that I came up with. No one asked for this one, but I'm putting it in there anyway because I think it's really fun. It's not so much of a substitution, but what to do with excess of ingredients. So I know right now people are kind of staying away from recipes that call for very specific ingredients or something that's going to take up a lot of staple ingredients that are harder to find. And so one of those things would be something that calls for egg yolks, but not the whites. If you're making a custard or anything that just calls for egg yolks, and then you're left with the egg whites and you're like, what am I going to do with this besides make a ton of egg white omelets? Which is fine, you can do that. But it's more fun to make meringue cookies. Even 2 egg whites, because you're whipping so much volume into them, is going to yield so many meringue cookies. I have a favorite recipe and I'll link it below. It is just meringue, the egg whites, sugar, cream of tartar, and then you can swirl in pretty much anything you like. The recipe is dark chocolate, but I've also made a raspberry puree and like really concentrated it so it's like jammy and nice and thick, and I've swirled that in. So it's kind of whatever you have. If you have chocolate, if you want to make a jam, if you already have jam, any other type of puree, or you can just leave them by themselves. They're delicious on their own. And that's a good way to use up egg whites if you're using a recipe that calls for only the yolks so that they're not going to waste. All right, so that's all the baking substitutions that I have for you today. Again, if I left any out or if there's anything else that you want to know, leave it in the comments below. This also goes for cooking, anything savory. If there's herbs or spices or anything that you can't find but a recipe calls for and you want to know something that would be good to substitute it with, it's a little easier with that because you're not working with chemistry and science and, you know, proper weights and measures. So leave that below too. And if I get enough, I'll do a savory version of this video. Like and subscribe. And next week I am doing an actual recipe. It's going to be the birthday cake that I posted on Instagram. And let me tell you, it was a trying day. It's a perfect video for this channel because I had many struggles and I overcame them, and the cake was delicious and beautiful. So tune in for that next Friday. And I hope you enjoyed this one, and thanks for watching.